Welcome back to the YouTube channel. If this is the first time on my channel, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel because I do content like this all the time. And then if you like what you're seeing right now, feel free to give this video a big thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's talk about the topic at hand. And this time, I want to talk about the brand new Nintendo Switch OLED model, or more like the old Switch OLED model, because it's been out for quite some time now, and the hype has already died down. Plus, there really wasn't that much hype to begin with when it comes to this model, just because it really wasn't a proper Nintendo Switch Pro. It was more like an incremental upgrade to the original Nintendo Switch, so it makes sense. Either way, I do want to cover this because I am a big Nintendo fan. I love the Nintendo Switch, and I play my Nintendo Switch almost all the time. Now, let's talk about this Switch really quickly. First and foremost, I've had this Switch now for about 3 months. And on top of that, I pretty much put in hundreds of hours into this system, and I've put most of my gameplay in handheld mode, and that should be the case because if you are buying a Switch OLED model, the only reason to buy it is if you're going to be playing strictly, for the most part, in handheld mode, or if you're going to be playing in tabletop mode. That's pretty much the only way to justify this system, because if you do play in the dock, you're not going to be getting any upgrades over the original Nintendo Switch or anything like that. All the graphics, all the frame rates, all the fidelity, all the performance things are going to be exactly the same from this Switch to the original Switch. I just want to make that clear, so don't think that you're going to be getting better performance in the dock. It's going to be the exact same situation, because the internals of this thing are exactly the same as the Switch launch model back in 2017. They didn't change any of the internals or any of the specs or anything about the system, which would make games play better in the dock mode of the actual Nintendo Switch. Now, when it comes to pricing of this Nintendo Switch, it's kind of an interesting situation. Right now, they make 3 Nintendo Switches. They make the original Nintendo Switch, which sits at $300. They also, later on, introduced a Switch Lite, which is a much more cheaper Switch that you can only play in handheld mode. You can't play it on a TV or a monitor, and that one sits at $200. And then this one, the Switch OLED, is the most expensive Switch Nintendo has made to date. It does sit at $350. Mind you, I'm not really happy with the price, and I think a lot of people agree. Why is this Switch $350? Sure, there's more parts in this, and sure, there's some more enhancements to this Switch than the original Nintendo Switch has, but I don't see how Nintendo is justifying $350. Is this Switch more expensive to manufacture? Is it because we're in a chip shortage right now and parts are hard to find that they had to justify $350? I think what it should have... Excuse me, I think what should have happened with this Switch, I think Nintendo should have tried to price this around $300. And I think that would have been the perfect sweet spot for this thing. What they should have done was release this at $300 and then cut the price of the base model to like $270, $250. I think that would have been the perfect situation, because if you look at it at a $350 standpoint, I don't think you're getting much more value than you would be getting with the original Nintendo Switch. Plus, you do have to remember the competition. I know Nintendo and other companies sometimes don't like comparing themselves to the competition, but there are other systems out there that you do have to compare yourself to. Let's look at the Xbox Series S. That thing gives you extremely amazing deal at only $300, and then you do have to look at the PS4 Digital, if you can find it in stock at this very moment for $400. That's also a very good deal. So you can see there's other systems that do have better performance and a lot of value to give you at the price cheaper than the Switch OLED, or slightly higher than the Switch OLED. I just think $350 just doesn't make sense for this system. And you do have to remember, with these purchases, always, you do have to calculate in some areas taxes and things like that. So you're not strictly paying $350. You might be paying like $360, $365, $370 for this system, depending on where you get this system. And honestly, I'm just not too happy with that price, and $350 just doesn't make sense. But anyway, let's talk about the Switch OLED. I do have it here on hand. Here is my system right here. You can see I did get the white color bundle right there. I don't have both Joy-Cons because I am a weirdo. I can't admit it. I do like funky colors or unusual colors. I don't care if my Joy-Cons don't match. So I have the blue Joy-Con on the right, and then I have the white Joy-Con on the left. of this system, and you may be wondering, how is Joy-Con drift? Because it's kind of like when you buy the Nintendo Switch, you just pretty much get Joy-Con drift by default, whether you like it or not. It's a big flaw with the Nintendo Switch. Honestly, I'm actually really surprised at this point that Nintendo hasn't been sued for Joy-Con drift, since Joy-Con drift is just so common. Everyone gets Joy-Con drift. So far, what I can say is I have put in over hundreds of hours into this Nintendo Switch, and on my Joy-Cons, I have not got Joy-Con drift. This is also a brand new Joy-Con as well, the blue one. It's not like an old one that's been laying around. This is a brand new Joy-Con. I want to make that very clear. And the Joy-Con that I got rid of, the other white Joy-Con that came in the box, didn't get Joy-Con drift. But to be honest, that's not really a fair thing to judge right now, because I think I'm not far enough in the lifespan of this Switch to really say if these Joy-Cons are going to get Joy-Con drift or not. But so far, they really do feel the same. They don't feel different than the other Joy-Cons. They might have a different texture just because they're new and things like that. But when it comes to the actual Joy-Cons, they feel the same. So most likely over time, I'm assuming that these Joy-Cons would get Joy-Con drift over time without a doubt. And it's kind of unfortunate because my last Nintendo Switch did get Joy-Con drift. It's really unfortunate. It's kind of like the Joy-Con drift was uncontrollable. But the weird thing is about Joy-Con drift is the fact that sometimes you would get Joy-Con drift, sometimes you would not get Joy-Con drift. And in my experience, that was the case. My Joy-Con drift was all over the place. It was kind of like playing the lottery. Would I get Joy-Con drift playing it, or would I not get Joy-Con drift playing it? And that's something that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be, oh, I'm playing my Switch in handheld mode. Let's see if I'm going to gamble tomorrow, and let's see what's going to happen with my Joy-Cons. And that was just such a weird thing. Right now, my older Joy-Cons, actually, the drift just went away. All of a sudden, I woke up and I didn't have drift. I'm like, that's weird, because 2 days ago, I had the most bizarre drift. It was so uncontrollable. It was so unplayable, but then it just randomly stopped. But then, you know, in the future it's going to come back and I'm going to be like, damn, my Joy-Con drift got worse. But anyway, let's talk about some of the features and some of the upgrades on this brand new Nintendo Switch OLED. Now, when it comes to the upgrades, the biggest upgrade you're going to be getting over the original base Nintendo Switch, of course, is going to be that OLED screen. This OLED screen is a 7-inch OLED screen, so that's the main benefit of buying the system. Outside of that, there's some more smaller improvements to the system, but that's the main reason you're going to be buying it, for that 7-inch OLED screen. And keep in mind as well, this system is slightly longer than the original Nintendo Switch, so if you do have some accessories for your original Nintendo Switch, some of them may not work, like grips and things like that. Luckily, a lot of cases will actually work with the Switch, especially the ones if you just put the Switch in, like a leather case that you open up and set the Switch in. Those will actually work, and I do have one from launch that does work because mine was so big. And you do have to keep in mind, this is bigger, but it's only bigger by like 1 inch, so it's not a big deal. Luckily, the older docks will work with this system. It won't fry it, it won't bust it, it fits perfectly and things like that. So if you have extra docks laying around, and even extra chargers from the original Switch or Switch Lite, that work perfectly on this model, which is nice. One thing I do have to note, after playing hundreds of hours, on this system in handheld mode, I must say I've never experienced things that people always talk about with Switches, whether it's my original Switch or whether it's this Switch now. I've never actually experienced things like, oh, I really feel like it's so uncomfortable in the hand, I really need to put a grip on it. A lot of people seem like they need a grip on their Nintendo Switch. I mean, it could be their personal preference, or it could be their hands, or whatever the case may be, but for me, I don't feel like I need a grip, and I don't feel like playing this in handheld mode is very uncomfortable. I can easily play for hours at a time and never feel any discomfort in my hands or anything like that. But again, I don't know everyone's situation, but for me, I don't have that problem, which is interesting. And you do have to keep in mind as well, I do play many different genres, whether it's shooting games, whether it's platformers, puzzle games, racing games, just a number of different genres, and yes, I've never felt discomfort playing the system. Another upgrade they did do to this system is the fact that you do got more base storage. It's nothing to really write home about, but you are going from 32 gig on the base model and the Switch Lite up to 64 gig. That's actually good, because I think your game saves save on the Nintendo Switch internal memory, and my internal memory on my other Switch was actually very low. I only had like 1 gig left. So I'm glad they did upgrade the storage. Makes me wonder why they didn't at least go with 128 gig, but I guess it's not really a big deal because you can add a micro SD card, and since you can add a micro SD card, it's not the end of the world, and since micro SD cards are so cheap for what it is, it's not that big a deal. And then another thing they did upgrade on this system, which is practically the last thing they did upgrade, is the fact that they did actually upgrade the kickstand here, which I 100% don't use because I never play my Switch in tabletop mode. I only play it in handheld mode or docked mode, to be honest. So this kickstand is not for me, but I'm glad they did add this kickstand either way because there are some people who do use their Switch in tabletop mode and things like that. This is the same stand you would be getting on something like a Microsoft Surface tablet or a Microsoft Surface computer, so that's very good. Oh, I did forget to mention, I wanted to mention it earlier, but I did forget to mention this Switch right here does have a defect, and I wanted to talk about it. It's not a defect that I need to worry about, and it's not a big enough defect where I want to return this system, but mine does have somewhat of a defect, and it's not game breaking or anything like that, but I do want to talk about that a little bit later. One thing you also do have to keep in mind as well, which a lot of people may not even talk about with this Nintendo Switch, I'm not sure if when you open the Switch stand, if these are mesh, if these are air vents, or these are speaker grills, or whatever the case may be. But either way, there's some mesh lining at the bottom of the Nintendo Switch, and the unfortunate thing is with the mesh lining on the Nintendo Switch, new Switch OLED, when you go to take out the stand, you do have to be super careful because you can run into the situation where you actually could end up damaging the mesh on the bottom. And unfortunately, just like a lot of other people, my mesh is kind of messed up on the bottom right there. If I rub my hands over it, it may be hard to see on camera, or you may not notice it, but it is actually out of place, and that is kind of unfortunate. I'm really kind of disappointed with Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch, honestly, because out of all the systems they've ever made, it really does seem like the Switch is the least durable. You always heard reports of the original Switch where it was cracking, where it was bending, the Joy-Cons are getting drift. After a while, the Joy-Cons wouldn't stay on the rails if you took off the Switch, the Joy-Cons all the time, and it just seems like these Switches aren't the most durable thing in the world. But I just wanted to mention that because a lot of people may not be aware of those little meshes across the bottom. So be careful when you're opening it up, because even though you think you're doing it right, when you put your fingernail up, it goes up. Some people say, oh, why don't you just take your fingernail and put it in the middle right there where you dock it and push it up so you won't end up damaging the mesh lining. But the thing is, you can't really push up there. You pretty much have to push on the sides of the Nintendo Switch right there. Now, what do I actually think about this system overall, and my thoughts and opinions on this? I am actually very happy I do own this system. I'm going to go ahead and boot it up to actually show you some gameplay of like Breath of the Wild, because right now at the moment I'm actually replaying Breath of the Wild because honestly Elden Ring has actually made me want to go back to Breath of the Wild, since Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games of all time. I love that game, and it's a fair assessment to actually compare this game to Elden Ring, because Elden Ring has a lot of comparisons to Breath of the Wild, in my opinion, and I think it's okay for me to compare them. And I did want to play again another playthrough, I do believe, Breath of the Wild, to compare the game, because I love this game to death. But I'm going to go ahead and show you some gameplay. And yeah, don't worry, I know most people have already played this game, but I do want to show you some gameplay, and I'm going to show you pretty much the beginning of the game, since I am replaying it from scratch anyway. I'm like on the Great Plateau, but I'm just going to show you like this, unfortunately, because I do have a weird setup where I can't change my camera to another view. If I change my camera to another view where you can see the Switch in handheld mode slightly better, it would actually mean that this setup that you're looking at right now would be too hard to reset up, so I don't want to do that. I really need another camera for things where I need to show something else in real life. That might be that might be later on in the future, but right now I'm just going to show you like this. But so far what I can say is the screen is absolutely gorgeous, and you won't be disappointed with your purchase. You can see the screen is phenomenal, and most games that you play on this system are going to look fantastic. I do have to be honest with you, but there are a couple of games that I feel like just do not look good in handheld mode, because you do have to remember there are some games on the Nintendo Switch that don't actually match the resolution of the screen. They only play less than 720p. Even though this is still 720p, you do have to keep in mind that games just look so gorgeous. We're talking about a very small 7-inch screen. We're also talking about a 7-inch OLED screen at 720p. Honestly, a lot of times when I'm playing this thing, it really does seem like it's 1080p or even 4K resolution. It's that crazy in handheld mode. It almost seems like when I connect it to a TV, I can really see more of the imperfections than I did with the original Nintendo Switch going from handheld mode to TV mode, just because this thing looks so gorgeous. It looks definitely better than me playing on my TV. Granted, I never owned a big screen TV that was OLED technology, but even so, this thing is just so gorgeous and so cool to actually look at. It's also really much more immersive just due to the fact that you have less bezel around the screen. The screen's OLED, it's bigger screen and everything like that. Overall, I'm very happy with my purchase of the Nintendo Switch OLED model. And keep in mind, my camera is probably, of course, just like everyone says, not doing the Switch OLED any service just due to the fact that you would have to see this in person and really play this thing. But the games just pop off the screen and things like that. Also, if you are wondering about things like burn-in, there's actually a very good video on YouTube that I think Wolfden just recently did. He pretty much left his Nintendo Switch in handheld mode on for like months at a time, and so far he's gotten slight burn-in, but it's nothing to worry about. So if you're worried about burn-in, don't be paranoid about burn-in. I know a lot of people are paranoid about things because these electronics are so expensive. Money to everybody's not easy to obtain. Don't be worried about burn-in. By the time the Switch OLED gets burn-in, we'll probably be on like a Switch Pro, a Switch 2, or something else from Nintendo without a doubt. Burn-in is nothing to write home about or nothing to really worry about, because I've owned things like tablets that have OLED, computers that owned OLED, phones that have owned OLED. I've owned other devices that have OLED technology in them, and I've never actually once had burn-in. If the burn-in was there, it was so minimal that you couldn't even see it on the screen. So don't think burn-in is that big a deal. If you are worried about burn-in, do things like switch games every once in a while, because if games have a lot of icons on the screen that are static for a long time, that could potentially cause burn-in, but for the most part, you shouldn't have to worry about burn-in. And yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say about this Nintendo Switch. I'm absolutely loving it and things like that. And I think it's definitely, it's hard to say, but I think it's actually worth the purchase. Now I want to talk about who this system is actually for and should you buy this system. If you own a system right now, especially if you own the original Nintendo Switch back in 2017, you could upgrade to this because your battery may be pretty bad. The original Nintendo Switch did have a lot of issues. The kickstand's not good. It gets beat up quite often. It bends. You can get cracking. Actually, on my original Nintendo Switch, it does have slight cracking on the top. I don't know what that was from. I didn't like damage it. I baby all my electronics, but for some reason that did end up getting a slight crack on the top of the system. But it was nothing to worry about. But it's kind of unfortunate there. And then with the original Nintendo Switch, if you're going to this system specifically, you do get better battery life in handheld mode because it does run the newer Tegra X1 processor. It's not like you're going to get better performance, but you are going to get slightly better battery because it is more proficient and it doesn't put out as much heat. And then on top of that, the screen is an OLED screen, and OLED is actually more proficient than what we were using in the original Nintendo Switch. If you're coming from a Switch Lite, that's going to be hard to tell. Maybe you like the size of the Nintendo Switch Lite, or maybe you're okay with the Nintendo Switch Lite, or you don't really play in the dock, or you don't really play that much. Maybe keep your Switch Lite. It's really hard to say who this is for. I can say this is, again, like I said at the beginning of the video, this system specifically is not for people who only play in the dock. If you only play in the dock, just skip this system. You're wasting money. Wait for a Switch Pro. Wait for the Nintendo Switch 2. Whatever the next system from Nintendo is going to be, because you're not going to really find any value out of the system. I can also say that for a lot of people who own the original Switch, it's not that much better than the original Switch, and spending a whole nother $350 for a system is hard to swallow when your original Nintendo Switch is probably already working and well and fine. Honestly, for a lot of people, I would recommend not even wasting time with this system because it's not like you're getting that much better things. A lot of the things in this Switch, I kind of call them like quality of life improvements. If this was a Switch Pro and you play in the dock a lot, or maybe you play your Switch a lot regardless, then maybe I would say, yeah, go ahead and actually buy the Switch Pro. But since this is not a Switch Pro, this is hard to recommend, especially since this thing is $350. I just wish Nintendo would have marketed this at $300. It seems like the perfect system at $300. Then a lot more people would be inclined to get it. You can sell off your old Switch. Now, if you are a person that doesn't have a Nintendo Switch, it's hard to say as well. A lot of people are going to say, oh, just go for the Nintendo Switch OLED model because you don't have a Nintendo Switch. But that's hard to say, because if you don't play games a lot, maybe just get the Switch Lite. You just want to play it on the go, or you don't mind that. Or maybe you'll get the base model at $300 because it's still a very capable and usable device. You can get that used, or you can get that brand new, I'm sure still. And that thing's going to be good because you can't miss what you don't have or are never seen. So if you've never seen the Switch OLED, maybe you're fine with like the Switch Lite or their base model Switch at $300. You can save some cash there, because I know a lot of people only buy the Switch for like Breath of the Wild. I've seen that for Mario Odyssey and for Animal Crossing. And for those people, maybe you're better off not really buying the Switch OLED. I think the Switch OLED is definitely targeted to more of those hardcore gamers that play all the time in handheld mode, and they play a lot in handheld mode, and they have a lot of different games to play, and they really want to experience the best Nintendo has to offer. Then this system is for them. But for a lot of other people, it's hard to say. I just really don't know your situation, and I can't say for sure, should you buy this system or should you not buy this system? It just really does depend what your situation. I know $300 to $350 is not that big of a difference, but to a lot of people that could be the price of an extra game. Maybe you're buying the Switch, the original Switch at $300, and you want to buy a game, and you never owned a Nintendo Switch. $300 plus a brand new game, since we know the big titles from Nintendo almost never get discounts. Maybe that's the best thing to do, actually buy the original Nintendo Switch or the Switch Lite and then buy a couple of games. It would have cost you cheaper than paying for this thing. But overall, I love this system, and I'm glad I actually got this system. It's not mind-blowing, it's not crazy or anything like that, but I do love this system. And I'm actually shocked too, well, I guess I didn't take it out the dock that much, that I didn't get any scuffs on the back of the system, because on my other system, it's scuffed to hell, unfortunately. But yeah, that's pretty much my wrap-up of the Switch OLED. I love the Switch OLED and everything like that. A really nice, small, incremental improvement to the original Nintendo Switch, which, of course, we all know this should have been the original Nintendo Switch back in 2017, without a doubt. But we know companies like making you spend more money are trying to put out these different models of their systems, and Nintendo is no different. They love to pump out iterations of the same hardware. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.